out. Everybody.
What's up, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of Lights Out. I'm your host, Josh.
And I'm your host, Austin.
And I'm the producer, Daniel.
And we are back this week with probably one of the darkest, most disturbing episodes of all time. Today, we're going to be jumping across the pond over to England to cover probably one of the most prolific, infamous sexual predators to ever walk this earth. Jimmy Savile, a man who I had never heard of before prior to this. And, I'm kind of glad I didn't, because this guy is on a whole other level. And for decades, he abused hundreds, potentially even thousands of men, women, children. And it is quite shocking because this is an individual who did some of the most horrific things you could possibly do, but got away with it in the end.
Yep. Never served one day in jail.
Which is just insane. And as this story unfolds, I think you'll start understanding why. I mean, this guy was a famous television personality. He did a ton of charitable work over the years. He was well connected with, the royal family, to other famous individuals in England, and was definitely protected.
Yep, no doubt.
So, just forewarning, this one is very, very rough. It was difficult for us to even research this one because it's just, the deeper you go, the more horrifying it gets. And it leaves you dumbstruck at the end because you're like, how did this happen?
And hopefully we can answer some of that question by the end of this.
Yes, indeed. But there's a lot of ground to cover here, so we're going to start at the very beginning with who is Mr. Jimmy Savile. So Sir James Wilson Vincent Savile, known simply as Jimmy Savile, was born October 31st, 1926 in Burley, Leeds, England. Of course, this guy is born on Halloween. And he was the youngest of 7 in a large Roman Catholic family. He grew up during the Great Depression, and his father struggled to make money for the family. Jimmy later said, quote, "I was forged in the crucible of want." Which I think probably true.
Yeah.
Especially as things unfold later on. And early on in his life, he had goals of getting fame and money at whatever cost. Later in life, his ethics didn't exactly match the values that his parents had tried to teach him. He actually described his father as scrupulously honest, but scrupulously broke. Okay. Jimmy suffered from what they thought was pneumonia at the age of 2, and his mother believed he was saved by prayer and a Scottish nun named Margaret Sinclair. As a child, he attended St. Anne's Roman Catholic School in Leeds, and after leaving school at the age of 14, he worked in an office. By 18, he was conscripted to work in the coal mines during the Second World War, and while working, he suffered spinal injuries from a drilling explosion. After this, he spent months recuperating. He even wore a steel corset for 3 years and used a cane to aid in his walking. He later became a scrap metal dealer, and in his late teens and 20s, he found an interest in playing records in dance halls. And this was really Jimmy's introduction to show business, which would become a lifelong career for him. According to his autobiography, he was the first to use 2 turntables and a microphone during his DJ set in 1947. Which, when I first heard this, I was like, no fucking way.
Yeah, right.
No, sorry, dude. And I don't even know the history of DJs. I was like, no way, this guy is it.
No, but it's like his own self-importance, right?
Right.
Right off the bat.
Yeah, exaggerating his accomplishments. And according to him, he was the first DJ ever and the first to spin twin turntables. But this would later be debunked, since the concept of twin turntables dated back as far as 1929, nearly 2 decades earlier. And in Jimmy's spare time, he loved riding his bike and professional wrestling. He also competed in the 1951 Tour of Britain cycle race. And by the mid-1950s, in his 20s at this point, he moved to Salford in Greater Manchester, England. And this is when his career as a DJ really started to take off. As he played dance halls and nightclubs, this was also when he was first predatory towards women. Seeing that he had power and influence in the nightclub scenes, he exerted this influence over underage girls. Allegedly, this is when he began raping several victims. He also exerted his influence over other patrons, and he would order bouncers to beat anyone up that he thought was unruly or a threat to him. To others, he spoke about these instances of violence with pride, and from early on, he showed no shame in his actions. Some in the industry thought that he was ridiculous, while others thought he was unforgettable. Both were true in reality. I mean, if you just see a picture of this guy, you know, if you're watching and you clicked on the thumbnail for this, I mean, he gets your attention because you're like,
he looks like a goofball. He's a cartoon character, basically.
He really is.
Yeah.
I mean, and not in a good way. Not a good cartoon character.
No,
looks like a
gross cartoon character.
A gross villain character. But even in areas where he wasn't the best, like bicycle riding or professional wrestling, he was still remembered by many in these communities because of his personality. He was an entertainer at heart. He always wanted to leave an impression on people, and even if that impression was just absolutely insane and ridiculous, at least in his eyes, he wouldn't be forgotten. And so he began dyeing his hair a new color all the time, and he would use his flamboyant looks and eccentric personality to forge an unforgettable career. He also had a talent for swaying people because he was often described as, quote, mesmerizing and, quote, charming. And he used this to distract anyone from the awful things that he was doing. And I think he knew this from day one.
Oh, yeah.
He knew that if I create this whole image, you know, it's a distraction.
Mm-hmm.
It's going to distract away from what's really going on the inside.
Yeah.
And what I'm actually doing behind everybody's backs and closed doors.
Yep.
And so he's like, the wilder I look, the wilder I act out in public, the least people, you know, people won't question me because they're just like, oh, I'm just weird. I'm this eccentric guy, you know.
And he very much embodies like the whole world's a stage type energy. It's all a front, which we'll get into a little bit later. But he found early on that, if I just kind of look ridiculous and act ridiculous and entertain people, they'll kind of, for whatever reason, kind of trust me.
Yeah. And I think he proves that.
Yeah.
That's what he did. And by all accounts from people who knew him, I think he's a clever, you know, people use words like clever and tricky. Conniving. He's a master manipulator for sure. You know, all of the traits of a predator.
Sure.
He has all of them. And he's definitely, because he started so early, I think he had many, many years to perfect those skills and practice them. And so he got so good that it just became part of who he is.
Right.
You know, it's like he's not even trying anymore to do this. He's just, he's mastered his craft. By the early 60s, he was considered one of the best DJs in Britain. And it didn't take long before he was discovered by a music executive from Decca Records, a large record label based out of London. And beginning in 1958, he was a DJ at Radio Luxembourg. And this lasted for 10 years. His listenership would peak at 6 million listeners, which...
That's a lot.
That's ass.
Oh, okay.
That's not good. No, it's pretty good for his, you know, world. But in the grand scheme of things, you know, he's not like worldwide or anything.
Right,
he's just
right.
Like, for a national, you know, radio show, pretty good.
Yeah.
Pretty good. In 1968, he joined BBC Radio 1, and he had his own show called Savile's Travels. So original. Over the next several years, he ran a variety of radio shows, including music, quiz shows, and a discussion program for teenagers, because he has all the information on being a teenager. You know, he's an expert. And he would continue a successful career in radio on and off up until 2007. And I mean, just look, he knows. You look at these pictures of him and he's just making the craziest fucking faces you've ever seen before. He knows it looks insane.
Yeah.
And I think he is fucking insane too. I think this is just who he is. I think some of it he plays up because he knows it's got that shock factor and that like, oh, look at Jimmy. You know, makes him memorable in his eyes. Meanwhile, he also got into television, starting in 1960 when he was the presenter of Tiny T's television music program called Young at Heart. Even though the show was broadcast in black and white, Jimmy showed off his different colored hair every single week, and this soon became his iconic look, which made him easily recognizable on TV and in public. And I think a good point that we were kind of talking about is, culture and society in Britain at this time, versus, culture. I don't know a whole lot. I'm not an expert, but I've been to London before, and it's not a good judgment of like all of England. I know that. But from my experience in London, it felt a lot like New York City. It's very like
more creative types.
And I felt like a lot of people were very like dressed up, and it's proper is a word that I would use. I felt like a sloppy American rolling around. I had sweats on, and I went to the grocery store, and I stuck out like a sore thumb.
Yeah,
I was like, oh, people don't just like wear sweats out here, and maybe it was the neighborhood in London I was in. But so for a guy like Jimmy who's dyeing his hair a different color, especially at this time period in history, it was like.
Yeah, this is the counterculture era, right? So instead of just the posh Britain dry, we get this. Whoa, this guy's colorful and crazy.
Mm-hmm.
It was something new, and I think that's why kind of the youth started looking to him rather than just the boring.
Everybody was kind of tired of the same old, and here's a guy that's like really shaking it up and doesn't give a fuck, quite frankly. And for many, his jump to television was impressive because most radio personalities struggled with the transition. Many failed, but not Jimmy Savile. He had an obvious natural talent for broadcasting, and in the 60s, Jimmy attracted a new audience. As we were saying, instead of the clean, posh, well-dressed individuals and dry presenters, Jimmy wore eccentric clothes and connected with the common man, especially younger people, when others couldn't. So he's like, reaching out to the youth, kind of like this wave of the 60s. He's kind of bringing it to England in a way. And,
he's got like that weird groovy sense to him.
I'm the DJ.
Yeah.
I'm bringing that to national television.
Yeah.
By the mid-60s, he presented the TV show Top of the Pops, which was the world's longest-running weekly music show and wildly popular at the time. He would host the show up until 2006. And his popularity grew so much that he soon became a household name across England. From here, he would go on to host a variety of shows over the next several decades, and he would become one of the biggest celebrities in town. Some even compared him to royalty. By the early 70s, he began to lean into children's programming. This began with the public information film Clunk Click Every Trip, which promoted the use of seatbelts and safety within vehicles. Seeing that his on-screen personality tracked well with children, Jimmy soon began the Saturday night variety show on BBC One titled Clunk Click in 1973. By then, Jimmy was in his late 40s, and his career in children's programming was about to go boom. In 1975, Clunk Click was replaced by the show Jim Will Fix It, an instant hit with UK children. This show would run for nearly 20 years. And the concept of the show is that children on the show would write a letter to Jimmy with a wish that would come true by the end of each episode, and then the child would be granted a medal. For this show, Jimmy was not the producer's first choice. I could probably see why.
Right.
According to the show's producer, Roger Ordish, he told the executive producer, Bill Cotton, that they should choose someone else besides Jimmy. He said that it had nothing to do with his moral behavior at the time. Quote, it had to do with his ability to communicate with young people. And Jimmy did openly say, quote, I hate children. So despite how Jimmy might have felt towards children, the show was still an instant classic and beloved by many, especially children across the UK. He might have been known as a ridiculous goofball early on, but for children, he was kind-hearted and generous. On one side of the camera, he made dreams come true, but on the other, there was a much darker side to Jimmy Savile. We all take supplements, or at least we know we should. But why are so many supplement companies charging these insane prices for products that really aren't that special or made with bad ingredients, quite honestly? It's frustrating and frankly, it's unacceptable. This is why we want to introduce you to Live Good, the brand that's turning the supplement industry on its head and giving it a good beatdown. Live Good believes that everyone deserves access to high quality supplements without the insane markups. They offer premium products formulated by an industry-leading team of natural health experts, and they cut out the middleman to sell them at the lowest prices anywhere, which I really appreciate that they're, it's not just about making money. It's about getting people high quality supplements that we all need at a reasonable cost. I can respect that.
Yeah, same, of course.
I picked up the organic Super Reds, which are great for increasing nitric oxide in the body, which boosts blood circulation because I have blood circulation issues.
Really?
Yeah. I've noticed that when taking Super Reds, that it really does help with the blood circulation across my whole lower body. I just feel better. And then after we got back from vacation, I was out in the sun a lot and pretty dehydrated. I didn't really drink a whole lot of actual water. So I was able to get their hydration amplifier, which are little packets pumped full of electrolytes, and just guzzled that when I got back, which really helped me kind of get back to my normal self because I was hurting pretty bad, after traveling. It takes a lot out of you. But what did you get?
I got the collagen peptides because, I like, he called me Rapunzel earlier.
Getting there.
And it's true. Yeah. I'm trying to get my hair flowing. No, I gotta get my hair cut. But yeah, the collagen peptides are good for your hair, your nails, your bones. It's good stuff.
Yeah, it's amazing stuff. Not only that, they have organic super greens, multivitamins. They have weight loss products, protein powder, creatine, detox, hormone products, skincare products, and they're all the highest quality available at prices people can actually afford. So it's no wonder that they're the fastest growing supplement brand on the planet with over 1.5 million customers and counting. So if you're ready to make the switch and start saving, we'll make it even easier for you. Use our link and you can save an additional 10% off your first order on top of the already lowest prices. Just go to livegood.com/lightsout to save 10% on your first order. That's livegood.com/lightsout. Don't miss out on this opportunity to invest in your health without overspending.
So as time went on, many had already seen the evil man behind this celebrity disguise, which is exactly what this is, right? This is just a disguise. He's really good at acting and putting on this persona, but that's about it. But because of his budding philanthropy work, which we'll get into later, and his on-screen persona with children, he really remained a beloved figure at the forefront of British public life. Even when his dark and disturbing side was exposed in public to some degree, it was mostly ignored, and this went on for years. So this is a jumping ahead a little bit later, but we kind of get a peek into the real Jimmy here. In a bizarre appearance on the radio series In the Psychiatrist's Chair in 1991, Jimmy had some odd things to say. Instead of the dream maker he kind of presented himself as on children's programming, he came across as very cold and calculated. The Irish psychiatrist and host of the show, Anthony Clare, later wrote an introduction to the published transcript of this interview, saying, quote, "There is something chilling about this 20th century saint." And they put saint in quotations. And this was one of the few times Jimmy's mask would publicly slip over his decades-long career. So here's Jimmy on the show explaining that he fears being exposed and has no emotions.
I can go skint in a day. I can be finished like that. If a scandal comes up or something like that, or the people go off you, you're finished. I'd much rather go skint with a brand new Rolls Royce in the garage than one that's 8 years old that I love, because I'll get more for it. So the day that I get finished by some whatever, then the bits and pieces that I've got, I make sure that they're all paid up and they're all brand new, because I could then go and be very unhappy in the south of France, covered in shame and sunshine and mad birds with bikinis on for a long time, because there was a new Rolls Royce there and a new this and a new that. So I am all terribly, terribly logical, which is actually bad news for you guys, because common sense and logic don't leave you a lot to find out.
No, we're much more interested in feelings, emotions.
Yeah, right, emotions, I haven't got any. I'm an oddity because I'm not here for treatment.
No.
So because I have got awesome common sense, and my common sense obviously works because it's worked for me, that would make me bad news from a psychiatrist or a psychologist, because there's nothing to find. What you see is what there is. So that's why I said that I'm bad news for somebody like you. God forbid I should have a problem and I have to come and see you with a problem. Then I'll be the same as everybody else.
But the thing that tends to get us into difficulties are our feelings.
Oh, aye.
They cannot be predicted or controlled.
No, because you see, feelings are not logic as such. And feelings can come out of a box inside you anywhere. I mean, it can suddenly pop out. I mean, if you have a tendency to violence, for instance.
Now, what about your feelings?
I haven't found them yet.
You can hear him chewing on a cigar.
I was just about to say that, and that'll become like his iconic thing is he just smokes cigars everywhere, even where he wasn't supposed to, like inside studios and stuff. And that's also, people always comment, terrible breath he always had. He stank. He you know, not to get super graphic, but he tasted of cigars too, just because his tongue, he was always smoking.
Can't imagine.
And his, if you ever get a peek at his teeth, they're rancid. Yeah,
it doesn't look like he brushed his teeth a day in his life.
Nope. Also, you'll hear, if you ever hear Jimmy, he uses a lot of English slang, which makes it really hard going through some of his videos. But he was saying the word skint earlier, and I was like, what is skint? It just means little or no money. But yeah, whenever he talks, he uses a lot of slang, which I think was maybe also appealing to a lot of people at the time, especially like the British youth.
Totally.
You see this guy, even though he looks like a disgusting old man.
Yeah, well, he's just like,
he talks like a young kid sometimes.
Yeah, it's this I don't give a fuck attitude, right? Like just I am
smoke here. I'm gonna use slang
on a stogie, and while he's like being interviewed on shows,
right?
Radio, it's like he just, he doesn't care.
Yeah,
so it's all about him.
What do you think about him just admitting that he has no emotions, no feelings?
I think somebody should have wrote that shit down in his file and did something about it. I mean, especially as things unfold, it speaks to who this guy really is. You know, he's giving glimpses into the real Jimmy Savile more than you would expect. And he says a lot of things that, you know, for most of us is a giant red flag, and be like, hey, there's something's up with this guy.
Yeah.
You know, and why on earth would they want this guy hosting a children's television program?
Yep. I think it's because he knew how to put on an act. That is it. And that's terrifying.
Yeah.
I have no emotions, no feelings, but I can play the part. I can play whatever part you want me to.
Nobody like this would ever be on a children's program today.
No.
Blippy got crucified because he pooped on his friend, and he had to give up.
I don't know this lore.
Blippy.
Wow.
And that's like, you know, the big scandal in children's programming in the last couple of years.
Wow. Well, it's good. We hold them accountable.
But he still like owns the show and stuff. It wasn't like, it was consensual. It was like this whole, I believe it was like this whole funny video they did for Vine or something like that.
Oh,
back in the day.
Gotcha.
It was just like a funny video they made of his friend or whatever. And
gotcha.
But like parents really freaked out because like, this is obscene. This is terrible. Like he's watching it right now.
I've seen this video before. I didn't know that was Blippy.
Yeah, that's Blippy.
Oh.
Yep.
Oh, goodness.
Of course, Daniel's seen this movie or this clip already.
It was a Harlem. You remember when the Harlem Shake trend was a big thing?
Yeah.
It's one of those.
Oh.
Yeah.
Yeah, they were doing a trend for a video, and it somebody dug it up or whatever, and then it kind of like he's decided to just step away for the sake of the show and have somebody replace him as Blippy. He still like owns the IP and everything to it.
I see.
But like,
it just goes to show we hold people at like a really high standard, especially for children's content now. Yeah, which is great. We should
absolutely great. Yeah.
And I pooped on my friends all the time. I just had the decency to do it, not do it on camera.
I think we all dabbled in
some Cleveland steamers,
everyone. Things, you know, like, you know, farting on your friends' pillows and stuff. Like somebody did that to me, and
you got pink eye.
I got pretty mad.
Yeah, but it's good that we're holding people to higher standards when you're around children. I mean, we should be finding actual saints to be around children. Wow, why am I blanking his name?
Jimmy.
No.
Mr. Rogers.
Yeah, Mr. Rogers. Like, wow, I don't know why I blanked on that, but Mr. Rogers was the ideal candidate for children's television. Because you can kind of look at Mr. Rogers and like, is there something up with this guy? Clean as a whistle. Clean as a whistle.
And it just seemed, so it's like, why they let him do this? And he did this show for 20 years.
Mm-hmm.
And all this questionable shit's happening. He's giving these questionable interviews publicly.
Yep.
And yet somebody is just allowing this shit to go on. And it's not like, maybe is it time to replace Jimmy? You know, but ratings will tank. Show might end. We'll lose a ton of money.
Yeah,
that's
it. You hit the nail on the head. You follow the money. I think there's a lot of money behind Jimmy. So why take him down when,
right?
You know,
why not? Why do what's right?
Right.
Exactly. To protect our children.
Yep.
Nah.
Yeah. We're making money here.
Making millions of pounds.
Yeah. We can't deal with ethics right now. We're making money.
Sick.
Yeah. Even others surrounding Jimmy later agreed that they could never sense any genuine emotion from him. And the Jimmy that was portrayed on radio and TV was simply just a character that he played. The true Jimmy was much, much darker. Dave Hardwick, a radio show contributor who knew Jimmy, described him as, quote, robotic, and he had a, quote, false smile when he was buttering you up on air. So that's it. He is just into theatrics, and he knew how to put on a good face. While performing live, Jimmy also had a strange rider. So a rider, if you're not in the entertainment business, it's basically a list of requests that a performer has so a venue can provide them with certain equipment and hospitality requirements. This includes things like snacks, water, security, a bouquet of flowers, whatever. And for Jimmy, his list was quite strange. All of it was expected to be fulfilled completely wherever he performed, or he would make a stink about it. His rider included his normal fee of 200 pounds that went to a charity. Okay, we're starting strong here, but then he wished to sleep the night in a tent outside with a sleeping bag and a large torch. A guard of honor with 6 young ladies in another tent to keep him safe, a trip around the local hospital, a presentation of some kind of municipal honor, framed drawing or painting of the town, odd, and some cigars and matches, of course. So that was his rider for a while when he was touring. And if he was ever asked to clarify the requirements of that honor guard, all he would say was, quote, the younger, the better. He was always extremely adamant about every single condition of his rider being met. He was also quoted saying, quote, no girls, no tent, no me. So,
the fuck?
Yeah.
Why did anybody be like, the fuck's wrong with Jimmy?
Yeah. Well, this is,
or they did, and they're like,
odd.
all right, well, he's this big star, so give him what he wants.
And I think we'll see that just time and again. Just like, oh, this is Jimmy Savile. We just have to give him what he wants. He's a huge name. There's a lot of money behind him. Don't ask questions.
And I know that this, he's not the only one that probably has weird fucking writers. So
True.
There's plenty of people in Hollywood and everywhere else, famous people who have strange requests, I'm sure. But
sure, yeah.
But this is just like, the younger, the better.
Disgusting.
He's just alluding to crimes.
Yep. Criminal activity.
Like, please supplement me with these items so that I can commit felonies. Thank you.
Yeah.
And nobody's like, maybe we should report this.
Maybe 1, we shouldn't. And 2, we should get the cops involved. But no,
we did.
So going forward, many of the victims mentioned in this episode remain anonymous. So sometimes we'll be using their real names if they've kind of put themselves in the public eye. We'll use their real name, but a lot of them will be pseudonyms for a lot of the victims. So sometimes I need to find a doctor. And you know what? I'm like the guy who pushes it off for way too long. I don't know about you. I have great health insurance through Mile High Media, and I don't take advantage of it as much as I should be, because a little bit of it is just setting up an appointment. I don't know why. I'm a little baby about just setting up an appointment, but with ZocDoc, I actually used it fairly recently to find a PCP. I didn't realize how streamlined it is and how easy it is to find somebody that you need. But yeah, he was great. He was kind, good bedside manner. He was really nice with my questions. He spent time with me, and I was like, damn, okay, ZocDoc came through. Where a part of me in the back of my head, I thought, is he just going to be like the easiest to find, the simplest doctor that's maybe not the best, but they need to fill some spots because their schedule's, kind of open. But I came in there. It was a great experience, I must say, personally.
Did he have reviews on ZocDoc?
Yeah, you can go read reviews, see how...
Real patient reviews, which I find really, really helpful.
Yeah.
Because you don't get that anywhere else, I feel like. Even on your insurance company's website, of course, you can search for providers there, but usually they have no reviews there.
Yep.
So it's a total gamble. And who's got time to go try out 5 different doctors before settling on one?
Right.
And so ZocDoc does a lot of that work for you and makes it extremely simple to not only find PCPs, but dermatologists. I used it recently to find a new dentist, which I love. And just the process is so easy to be able to hop on the app or the website. You can just search, compare high quality in-network doctors, and then click to instantly book an appointment. No phone calls, no sitting on hold. I
did everything online. Yeah, it was great.
Beautiful. And then usually once you submit that appointment through ZocDoc, the office then reaches out to you and provides you the new patient forms, whatever you need to fill out. And it's seamless. You don't have to get on the phone at all. So ZocDoc just makes it super simple. We love it. We know you will as well. If you haven't tried it yet, you can get appointments in as little as 24 to 72 hours of booking. You can even score same-day appointments sometimes, which we love. So stop putting off those doctor's appointments and go to ZocDoc.com/lightsout to find and instantly book a top-rated doctor today.
That's ZocDoc.com/lightsout. ZocDoc.com/lightsout. So one girl who had agreed to these conditions and spent the night with Jimmy and 5 other girls later reported about the experience, and anonymously, she claimed that she was 17 years old and not the youngest girl there. All the girls slept in one tent, and by the early morning hours, Jimmy had plied the girls with vodka. He then entered their tent and, quote, tried it on with all the girls. Unfortunately, the anonymous victim would not elaborate on what exactly that meant, but she did call Jimmy a, quote, disgusting old man and a pervert. By the next day, all the girls posed with Jimmy for a newspaper photograph, and all the while she was thinking, quote, get me out of this shit. I was out of my depth. It was horrible. So many times, Jimmy wasn't even secretive about his sexual exploitations, and dating back to 1968, Francis Rossi, the frontman for the band Status Quo, was approached by Jimmy backstage at a Top of the Pops recording. The band's breakthrough single, Pictures of Matchstick Men, had just entered the top 10, and Francis Rossi was only 18 at the time. Jimmy invited him to, quote, come and see me tarts in his dressing room. Tarts, again, he's using British slang here. This is a word for prostitutes, which is short for, sweethearts. That's where tarts come from, but it's prostitutes. Francis declined the offer, and ever since, the band kept their distance from Jimmy whenever they appeared on Top of the Pops several more times. Years later, Francis said, quote, I keep hearing, how did he cover it up for so long? I heard he paid a lot of people off, but where did he get the money? Francis also described rumors of a, quote, local mafia who would apparently intimidate victims and witnesses to keep quiet about Jimmy's sexual abuse. But that was the big question. How did Jimmy keep all this under wraps for so long? Because his sexual abuse would become so rampant that you can go back and watch a 1976 Top of the Pops clip where he molested 18-year-old Sylvia Edwards on camera. You can see her freaking and jumping while she struggles to get away from him. Here is that unfortunate clip of that incident.
The fella could get used to all this. As it happened to you, they could get used to it. So, ladies and gentlemen, all we can say is good night from all of us here on Top of the Pops. And it's number one time. And, of course, if you believe me now, it's from the one and only Chicago. And thank you very much indeed.
Fucking insane.
Crazy.
It's so obvious what's going on here.
Yeah. And that's also, you could kind of see the power of the camera there, where it's like something wrong is happening, but everyone's just look at the camera, what is going on next to me. But this is going on national TV, so don't screw it up kind of energy. And I think that's why no one really looked over, but he's just doing it.
There wasn't a
everybody.
fucking camera person that was like, this is really fucked up. That's what's happening right now. Stop this. And what editor let this go to air? What the fuck?
Right. Yeah.
Like, that is what blows my mind about this whole fucking thing, is that so many people turned a blind eye to his abuse and allowed it to continue.
Yeah. This is a very stark example of that.
Why? Why?
I think it's a cultural disease. I think it's a cultural problem.
It just was accepted. This is just accepted behavior.
I think so.
From somebody as dark in his social status.
Yeah,
like,
I think as dark as that sounds, I truly think it's a cultural problem where people would see it and be like, "Oh, it's Jimmy, whatever." So here's Sylvia explaining the attack in her first 2012 interview. So this is many, many years after it occurred.
And I just felt his hand go underneath. And that's what I jumped up, but I went to go back down again because I couldn't go anywhere. And all of a sudden his hand was still there. So I was trying to push it away, but he wouldn't go. I mean, I just screeched. But I started feeling embarrassed because where can you go? I had all these people in front of me and I couldn't get down these step things. So I had to just stay there, but I was just trying to push it. And I was just getting really flustered.
Yeah, so we'll get into that part of it. Yeah, just crazy and awful that she's just like trying to get away too, and she can't. And then she feels embarrassed about it.
which I totally understand.
Yeah. When Sylvia complained about the attack to a man on the studio floor, she was told to get lost, and he said, quote, "That's just Jimmy Savile." So really, Jimmy didn't even have to keep this level of abuse under wraps. Sometimes he sexually assaulted people in plain sight, knowing he could get away with it. So over time, the age of the children interested in Jimmy's programming had risen to like more teenager, and especially on Top of the Pops, this show that we're talking about, and more teenagers became interested in his content, which gave him more access to potential victims.
It's crazy to think that he just continues to get more popular, more famous, richer, no repercussions whatsoever.
None.
You wonder if anybody pulled him aside and was like, "Hey man, you need to
chill out
a bit. Like, can't be doing this on national TV." You wonder if those conversations ever even happened.
I mean, yeah, I don't know. I would hope
he was getting paid
so.
by somebody. Somebody at the fucking network had to have been like, but maybe not. Maybe like, this guy's so great for us.
Yeah. And knowing that she went up to that guy on the studio floor and he just said, "Hey, that's Jimmy," that goes to show that is a
sexually assaulted.
Yeah. Yeah. And that shows that if the employees have that sentiment towards whatever's going on, this is a systemic issue. This is creeped through quite a lot of at least this studio, we can deduce, which is disgusting. And so then you have to ask, well, how far does that go? How far does that understanding of, hey, it's just Jimmy go?
That's the $1 million question, I think.
Yeah.
How far did that go? Another victim was 15-year-old Claire McAlpine, who went by Samantha Claire as a dancer on Top of the Pops. On the morning of March 29th, 1971, Claire was found lying on the floor of her bedroom at her home in Watford by her mother. A bottle of tablets rested next to her body, and she had died of a fatal overdose. Also next to her body was her red diary. Her last entry said, quote, "Don't laugh at me for being dramatic, but I just can't take it anymore." In the earlier pages, she had written a long list of radio DJs and other show business personalities who she claimed had, quote, used her. She claimed that many of whom she listed exploited her and promised her fame and fortune if she slept with them. One of her entries mentioned a DJ who had taken her to his house for the night and given her a pill that made her feel like she was, quote, floating on a cloud. Jimmy, who was in his 40s at the time, was asked by police if he knew or remembered Claire from a show, and he said, quote, "I studied a photograph of Claire very closely. I cannot recollect ever seeing the girl in my life. They say she came from Watford. I don't know anyone who lives in Watford." At the time, he denied having any sexual relations with underage girls, but he admitted that he had dated women from the show. According to the coroner, they ruled that Claire had committed suicide after deciding that her dreams of becoming a pop star would never come true. Although her diary was considered by law enforcement, no legal action was ever taken against anyone she had listed. Many were never even questioned or successfully identified. A police spokesperson said at the time, quote, "It'll be ridiculous to connect anyone or anything mentioned in her diary with reality." The BBC also dismissed the allegations at the time. So there you go. There's just a perfect example.
Yeah.
Nobody doing anything when there's, this poor girl just died. I'm like, huh?
Yeah, forget about it, whatever. Yeah. And this also
can't and won't do anything.
If you believe her diary, this also shows that once you start peeling back the layers, Jimmy might not be alone here. This might be many, many people we're talking about who are also pedophiles in this industry.
Yep. Rolf Harris is one. He's actually, it showed up on Jimmy's show. Jimmy Will Fix It. Rolf Harris, an Australian television personality, he actually went to prison for some of his crimes.
Damn.
And they were friends. So absolutely, he probably ran in a circle with other celebrities that were participating in these types of acts.
There's at least one other guy I know in their inquiry into Jimmy. One other guy did go to prison for a very short amount of time, which we'll get into later. And he was known having pedophiles as the guests on his show.
Yep. Rolf Harris was on his show.
Oh, really?
And there's a clip out there. It can't really show it, but he like does this drawing or whatever and brings his teenage girl in there, and then he says some really weird, questionable shit, and the drawing's all really weird, and and he turned out to be a pedo as well.
Yeah.
So
and Gary Glitter, that was another
Gary
guest
Glitter,
he had on there who was a pedophile,
which is just insane.
Yeah,
this is on a children's program.
Yeah, and you're like, how deep does this run, man?
Although police and the BBC didn't believe her, Claire's family and friends never doubted her. Years later, Claire's diary entries would prove to many that Jimmy Savile was not alone in his actions. Sexual predators like him had infected British show business, and even if some weren't directly involved in the assaults, the culture surrounding these assaults allowed them to continue. So Jimmy didn't necessarily have to intimidate or pay off anyone, and he just simply thrived in an environment that protected sexual predators.
Yep.
Clearly. Even to this day, many of the BBC staff and DJs who worked alongside Jimmy for years have remained silent over the sexual abuse allegations. It's like, where's your conscience, people?
Yeah.
God. As for Jimmy, he was obviously lying when he denied having sex with underage girls on the show. He often would have tea with the parents of the young girls. Then he would seduce the parents with his charm and whimsies to gain their trust. And once he gained their trust, he would molest or rape their daughters, which is just absolutely horrifying. At times, it's believed that he would abuse his victims, whom he would find through shady connections within the BBC. Beginning at age 8, Leisha Brooks was introduced to Jimmy through a family friend who was working at the BBC in the late 70s and early 80s at the BBC television headquarters in West London, and this so-called family friend took her to meet Jimmy, who he called Uncle Jim. On their first visit, Jimmy asked her to sit on his knee while he autographed a book she had. He then shifted her back against his body and molested her. She described him as, quote, bony and he stank. She was then consistently invited back as a, quote, guest every other weekend. And over the next 2 or 3 years, she was sexually abused by over 30 men at the BBC. The so-called family friend would reportedly be convicted of child abuse when Leisha was 11. But Jimmy and the rest went on without consequences. When Leisha was 19 and gained the courage to report the incident, she made an official police complaint in 1986. Merseyside police claimed they had handled her complaint appropriately. Her allegations against Jimmy were not taken seriously, of course, and there was no investigation. And this would sadly not be an isolated incident. Another report included an 8-year-old boy named Ian, who was forced to perform oral sexual acts on Jimmy and a friend of his. Another time someone walked in on them, and all they said was, quote, whoops, and then left. God. Another time the boy was assaulted by Jimmy's friend as Jimmy watched and laughed. One victim later claimed that she had been abused over 100 times by multiple people at BBC, including Jimmy. As years went on, it appeared that this level of abuse was an institutional, and as Austin said, systemic problem that seemed to be accepted, defended, and sometimes initiated by many who surrounded Jimmy. So I think it becomes very clear this was a rampant issue all throughout the BBC, likely all the way to the very top, which helps explain a little bit on why Jimmy was able to get away with this for so long. But again, there's, it's hard because I understand people are scared. People don't want to speak out. People don't want to risk losing their jobs. I get it to a certain extent. But it's like, if you're that person that walks into a room of a young boy being sexually assaulted by Jimmy or anybody else, and you don't say anything.
Yeah. You're a bad person.
You're just a bad, anonymously put in a tip. Like, what are you doing? Like,
there's no excuse.
There's no excuse for that.
I can't understand that at all. I have no sympathy for people who stay quiet about something like that. It's the same thing with the Jerry Sandusky shit. Like, all the people who heard the sexual abuse going on that never reported anything. I'm like,
what's more important?
What's more important?
Your fucking career,
or your career,
your reputation, or a poor child's sexual abuse.
Yeah.
And stopping that.
I don't understand that.
I don't get it either. But out in public, Jimmy used his caravan mobile home. He had this like Mercedes, RV type of vehicle. And it's just very creepy to watch him drive this fucking thing around. And he would clearly use it to lure underage girls into the van while he was on tour. And his driver of this caravan, Dennis Garbutt, at the age of 78, opened up about what had gone on decades ago. He also emphasized he's filled with remorse for not going to the authorities to reveal his suspicions that children were being attacked in the caravan. Dennis had only worked for Jimmy for 1 year before he quit. And he didn't fucking do anything.
Yeah.
And you're not even working there. Like, just go. Is it like, what is the fear? That people aren't going to believe me?
Is that
then
the
you
worst
take it to every
scenario?
fucking person until somebody listens.
Yeah.
Take it to the publications. The media will run that shit.
Yeah.
The
BBC wouldn't.
No.
But find another publication.
Go find a newspaper that'll fucking run, the story.
Yeah.
And at least get some attention so people look into it. But I don't know. It's hard to understand.
It is hard to understand. And I mean, he does clarify, he's like very filled with remorse. And it's like, yeah, as you should be. You should be filled with remorse.
How come nobody wanted to be the hero? How come nobody wanted to be the hero to step up and put an end to this, or at least try?
Yeah. And we will get into it a bit later where there was a lot of backlash of people coming out where it was like, how dare you try and take this man down he's a beloved figure in British culture and we love him. Like, how dare you? So I think maybe that's part of the fear of trying to take him down or at least report some of his behavior.
And it's a relatively small country, it's different. It's, if you're that person that does that and people think you're lying,
then
your life's going to kind of suck probably a little bit.
Right.
People are going to call you names. Maybe it's hard to get work, but it's like,
I don't know.
If you know the truth about what's going on, and you know that in the end, this guy's a bad guy.
Yeah. You should have at least an ounce of conviction within you to be able to report this.
Well, Dennis later said, quote, when he stopped, he would have young girls. We, meaning Dennis and his wife, both feel bad that we never said anything to the police. We're as bad as all the others for not coming forward.
So at least they're admitting.
Appreciate the accountability he's taking, but it's a little too late. As Jimmy toured Britain in 1971, sometimes for a show, Savile's Travels, he would lure vulnerable girls as young as 12 into the caravan, and he'd often do this during fundraising events at hospitals. Dennis said that Jimmy would give him a signal to leave the caravan so he could bring his victims to it and assault them. Dennis would then go watch a movie or just walk the streets for a while. That mental image is just horrifying.
Yeah, it's awful.
And I'm like, where are these 12-year-olds' parents?
True.
And I guess, he's this child TV star. And so parents have this innate trust in him.
Yeah, he's fine.
So like, why?
He's great.
We don't know any better. So
Yeah. And just if you just knew him from his TV personality, he's just a fun guy who's good with kids. So whatever. Yeah.
While Jimmy was in London to appear on Top of the Pops in 1971, he stored the caravan in a car park in the red light district around King's Cross. In an interview that year, he said, quote, "I tramp around the country like a gray timber wolf. I'm a wild animal where the world and its surroundings are aware of my own needs. Look, a guy can stand on stage with a bolt through his head, and because he's in showbiz, someone will fancy him. It's a fact that girls fall for me, and well, I'm single, and I'm normal, and I get my fair share."
So he's admitting, look, I can stand on the stage with a bolt through my head and look like an idiot, and people fancy me.
It's kind of like that Trump quote.
They say, I have the most loyal people. Did you ever see that? Where I could stand in the middle of Fifth Avenue and shoot somebody and I wouldn't lose any voters, okay? It's like incredible.
Sorry, not to bring up, well,
No,
he is
that's
our
fair.
president here soon, so.
Yeah, why not?
But that quote came to my mind when I just read this. It's
Wow,
like,
yeah, that's a stark comparison. Yeah.
I mean, there's definitely...
Same energy a little bit. Yeah.
Have you ever had a moment, Austin, in your life where, maybe you had a big hot date coming up
Mm-hmm.
and you had a giant pimple show up overnight?
Mm-hmm.
How did you deal with that?
Yeah. Huge. Center of my forehead.
Dude. But yeah, nobody likes to deal with acne.
No.
And skin issues can be very complicated. They can be hard to, diagnose yourself. But thanks to our sponsor, Apostrophe, they make it extremely easy to get the best skincare possible. Apostrophe is an online platform that connects you with an expert dermatology team to get customized acne and dermatology treatments for your unique skin. Through Apostrophe, you can get access to oral and topical medications that use clinically proven ingredients to help clear acne. And what's great, it's super easy. You simply fill out an online form, online consultation about your skin goals, medical history. Then you just snap a few selfies and a dermatology provider will create a customized treatment plan just for you. It really is that simple. They offer access to prescription treatments for all types of acne, from hormonal acne to facial acne and even back, chest, and butt acne.
Hey, you guys should see my...
So they've got creams, topical solutions, they've got oral medications, they've got sunscreen. I mean, we all need good sunscreen, especially if you have sensitive or oily skin.
I do have sensitive skin. So
Very important.
yeah, the sunscreen's really nice. Hydrating.
Nobody wants to be dried out.
No, the sun's already doing that much.
Exactly. Well, our experience with Apostrophe was extremely simple. We're still going through it, trying to figure out exactly what our treatment plans are. But the process, especially at the very beginning, couldn't have been easier. I mean, snapping selfies, Austin and I do that on the daily anyway. So, super easy to upload those. And just waiting for our dermatologist to take a look at our faces and see what they can do to help improve.
Hopefully.
Even just dark spots around my eyes,
Yeah.
I don't get as much sleep as I used to being a parent. So maybe they can help me out there. But we have a special deal for our audience. Get your first visit for only $5 at apostrophe.com/lightsout when you use our code lightsout. That's a savings of $15, and this code is only available to our listeners. To get started, just go to apostrophe.com/lightsout and click get started, then use our code lightsout at sign up, and you'll get your first visit for only $5. Thanks, Apostrophe, for sponsoring this episode. Jimmy would also pick out his victims during autograph signing sessions. According to victims, he would also lure young girls to the caravan with orders to clean it up. This is how he would get them inside the vehicle. One of his victims, who went by the name Jill, documented her experience with Jimmy. She recalled a phone call one day in the summer of 1970. She was 19 years old at the time and living in Brighton. The man who called her said he was Jimmy's chauffeur, and he told her that Jimmy was making a personal appearance at Worthing Town Hall and that he wanted to meet her specifically. At the time, Jill had been a part of Jimmy's fan club and had written a letter to him a few years earlier, so she agreed to meet him. The moment that Jimmy spotted her, he put his arms around her and he led her back to his caravan. Jimmy had installed a mattress in the back where he would assault his victims. Once they were both inside, he locked the doors and he called her, quote, beautiful little dolly bird. And then he said, I'd like to lock you up in my cupboard and take you everywhere I go. Jill became nervous and confused. And then he said, "I could buy the house next door to your house and be very happy." He also kept saying, "I'm the strongest man in England." Jill thought he was crazy, and before she knew it, Jimmy was on top of her. He was trying to rape her and shoved his hand in her pants and molested her. She tried to fight back, but he overpowered her. He then asked her if she was on the pill, and she said no, which he then became very angry, shouting, "Why not?" Jill was eventually able to free herself after about 20 minutes of assault and a dash to the door. Jimmy then asked if she wanted to be a dancer on the show, and also said she could take something from his caravan if she wanted a souvenir. She ended up taking a small crucifix with a deer at the foot. She later brought this with her, decades later, when she reported the attempted rape in 2007 to the Sussex police. She also brought it with her when she spoke to the Crown prosecution lawyer in 2012, which was kind of smart.
Yeah, it's a piece of evidence.
Piece of evidence so that people
connect her to it. Yeah,
know she was actually, her story's true and she was actually there. This caravan of his, which ended up getting the nickname the Pervmobile, would even be seen parked outside of, you guessed it, Buckingham Palace, when the Queen deemed him an officer of the British Empire in 1971. He was also reportedly friends with Prince Charles, who had met through mutual charity interests. And Jimmy would later be knighted by the British royal family for his charity work in 1990. Former royal family press secretary Dickie Arbiter said Jimmy's behavior had raised concern and suspicion when he had acted as an informal marriage counselor to Prince Charles and Princess Diana in the late 1980s. Wild.
What?
Although no official reports have been made, the same press secretary added that during his regular visits to Charles' office at St. James Palace, Jimmy, quote, do the rounds of the young ladies taking their hands and rubbing his lips all the way up their arms.
So
he's even doing it at the
at the damn palace in front of royal family. And they're just like, oh yeah, there was concern and suspicion, which to me reads like them trying to clean themselves of the situation after the fact. They're like, oh yeah, there was some concern and suspicions about him. And then they kind of like no longer were friends after a certain point. But it's like you were still hanging out with him for a very long time.
Which doesn't surprise me.
Yeah, the royal family.
I mean, the amount of scandals.
Yeah. They're very good with
Prince Andrew, Prince Charles. Yeah. There's a lot of shit. But the fact that they're honoring this guy, giving him some of the highest honors in the land.
Yep.
Says it all.
And he's seen, there are pictures of him. This one's with Princess Di. He's in like a goofy tracksuit. That was like his iconic look. And he just looks like a goofball.
Like a fucking... the hell, dude.
Yeah.
For sale shirt on.
Yeah, he's a douche.
God. Well, gets even worse.
Yep.
He also became close friends with then Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher through the 80s, who once described him as marvelous. Reportedly, he would often write her letters. And he celebrated New Year's Eve with the Thatcher family for fucking 11 years, believe it or not.
Mm-hmm. So he's connection.
Connected.
The damn prime minister hanging out with them on New Year's.
And
for
it
11
makes
years
me
straight.
fucking wonder if he had dirt on them. Potentially. This is all speculation, but is it possible?
Maybe it's like a little bit, I know what you've done, you know what I do, so let's just keep it hush hush.
Right.
That could be
possibly
going on, yeah. But yeah, so God, and a big part of this is how he made these connections was through his charity work, because while Jimmy was rampantly abusing children in the 70s and 80s, he had also increased his charity work in this time. And it's estimated that he raised around 40 million pounds, which is somewhere around like 130 million pounds in today's money, calculating for inflation. And that's all towards charity during his lifetime. And this even got him the nickname Saint Jimmy. Much of his charity work involved health and education, and many believe that his charity work was an attempt to gain social status and conceal the terrible things he was doing at the time. He also used these facilities as a way to gain access to potential victims, which is abhorrent. Over the years, he sexually abused children who were medically and mentally ill. He would often take them out for a drive in his Rolls Royce before assaulting them. Sometimes he told his victims he had a, quote, instinct for knowing who was a virgin. Through these fundraising endeavors, he also networked with law enforcement agencies and the higher-up administrations within these facilities. So having these connections meant that many of the victims' pleas for help were often ignored at the time. These administrations knew that if they took Jimmy down, the constant flow of what? It all comes back to money, right? To their facilities would then stop. Ultimately, his philanthropy was just a ruse, and it was through this work that he began abusing an alarming amount of children. One of the facilities he often targeted was the Duncroft-approved school in Staines. This school was meant for, quote, emotionally disturbed teenage girls in the 1970s. Here, Jimmy carried out 46 documented sexual assaults among 22 students and one visitor. I do want to put a little note here that it's hard to parse through like this. Okay, this is documented and this is reported and this is an allegation. So it's hard where all the numbers are coming from. So just keep in mind the vocabulary as I'm going through this.
Different places.
Yeah. 13 victims of these documented sexual assaults were abused on at least 2 occasions by Jimmy, and 5 were assaulted when the school was under the control of Bernardo's Children's Charity in October 1976. 166 ex-pupils of the former girls' school would later be contacted by detectives in connection with Operation Outreach, the official investigation into Jimmy's sex abuse that launched in 2012 at the height of the sex abuse scandal, conveniently after Jimmy had died. 44 statements were taken and 300 officer reports were submitted among those 166 former pupils that were contacted. The initial investigation between 2007 and 2009, yeah, you heard that right. These are 2 different investigations, and one had occurred before Jimmy was dead. This one was named Operation Ornament and did not uncover nearly as much information compared to what they would find after Jimmy's death in 2011. Smells pretty bad, right? In October 2009, the Crown Prosecution Service advised that there was insufficient evidence to take any further action, and no charges were brought. These cases involving Duncroft wouldn't be reinvestigated until, like I said, after Jimmy's death, and that one would be much more damning. The official report for the second investigation, Operation Outreach, released in 2015, claims that Jimmy first visited Duncroft on January 21st, 1974, and he continued to visit until the school closed temporarily in 1979. He had visited at least 16 times. All of the statements from victims and witnesses suggested he attended more frequently. 25 of his 46 sexual offenses took place within the school grounds, including in and around the principal's office, the entrance to the school, the communal TV room, the kitchen, and the dining room. Of the abuse that took place outside of school grounds, 13 of the attacks were reportedly carried out in Jimmy's car. According to police, these attacks range anywhere from non-consensual kissing to forced oral sex, which he called, quote, a Jimmy special. If they became ill, he would force them to vomit outside of his vehicle, meaning during what he was doing to them. He often kept his victims quiet by offering them money, cigarettes, and a post office account, a job at a nightclub, or a trip to the BBC studios. He then threatened that if they didn't cooperate, they would ruin opportunities for all the other girls. No more visits, free cigarettes, and no more trips to the BBC. Here's Karen Ward, one of the students at Duncroft at the time, explaining how Jimmy operated.
Jimmy Savile used to come to Duncroft. He used to take us girls out. We loved it when he came. Everybody knew he was a perv, and everybody knew that he was going to be groping and wanting sex and wanting other worse things than just plain sex. But he brought lots of nice things with him. We got nice food when Jimmy was coming, and we got lots of cigarettes. He used to bring about 1,000 cigarettes with him at the time. And of course, cigarettes was the currency in that kind of environment. So girls just flocked around him, and he bought sweeties, and sometimes he bought perfume, and he bought makeup. A lot of things were duty-free. And he just lavished gifts on everybody and was all jolly. And then he wanted people to come out for a ride with him in his car. Jimmy Savile took me out in his car one afternoon and pulled into a lay-by. This had happened before, and he had just sort of groped. There'd been a bit of snogging and groping. But this time he wanted more. He'd hinted on previous occasions that he wanted me to give him oral sex and I didn't want to, and he wanted me to have sex with him and I didn't want to. But on this occasion, he promised me faithfully that if I gave him oral sex, he would take me and the other girls to London and we could be on his television show. And of course, like any 15-year-old girl, I suppose, even now, I really wanted to be on the telly and I really wanted to meet all these rich and famous people. We were in an approved school for intelligent but emotionally disturbed girls, and there we were in London on a regular basis, mixing with rich and famous people, rubbing shoulders with celebrities, and it was fantastic a lot of the time, but some of the celebrities were actually not very nice. Jimmy Savile had a girl on his lap and he had his hand up her skirt inside her underwear, and she came from Duncroft and she was 14. We were good friends. The girl that Gary Glitter was having sex with also came from Duncroft. I think she might have been not quite 14. But we were all from Duncroft that day. This isn't easy. It's not easy to come out and admit to something that you're actually bitterly ashamed of. I am ashamed of that. That's disgusting. What I did is it's not easy. It's never easy to admit it, that you were a victim. It's never easy to admit that you did anything that you're ashamed of. And having done it and then found that it was scrapped, didn't matter, once again, I felt upset, aggrieved, angry.
I think that she did a very good job at it, just explaining his methods and manipulation, and how he was able to convince, really, his victims to participate in these things, and and promise them this, promise them that, gifts and trips and being on his TV show and all of these things, and these are vulnerable children that don't even understand what's going on, and he's just preying on that over and over and over again, and then also participating in it with other people too.
Yeah. She also describes, it's so sad that emotionally she still feels ashamed all those years after the fact, and it's like I feel like that's probably a common sentiment among a lot of victims, unfortunately, and it's just really sad to hear that. Knowing that, they didn't do anything wrong. This is on Jimmy. He's fully responsible for what was going on.
And it's on all the people that knew that this was going on. They have some liability there.
Yeah.
That they knew this kind of behavior was going on and they didn't turn a blind eye to it.
Yeah.
And allowed him to continue preying on children who don't know any better.
Yeah.
They don't understand what's happening. They're just doing what they think in the moment is what they should do. And then also you have this creepo Jimmy over here. There's probably feelings of scared. What happens if I don't follow with what he says? And, there's so many things that play out through someone's head in these situations that it unfolded the way that it did. But it's absolutely horrible to hear.
Yeah. So as you could probably tell by now, Jimmy had rigorously calculated this abuse. And according to one victim, he knew that it was the victim's word against his, and the victim, unfortunately, would never be believed, which was true. The anonymous victim also stated that many of these girls at Duncroft were vulnerable and needed love and attention, and Jimmy knew exactly how to exploit their needs and vulnerabilities. A former Duncroft pupil, Carol Wells, later spoke out against Jimmy. She claimed that she was molested by Jimmy in his car in 1973 when she was only 14 years old. Jimmy had scared her into silence for decades, but she was finally willing to make a statement to police after other victims had come forward. Evidence pertaining to 2 former Duncroft staff members was apparently passed to the Crown Prosecution Service in May 2014. 6 months later, they didn't believe they could get convictions, so they dropped the cases. The chief executive of Bernardo's, Javed Khan, said, quote, "We are shocked and saddened by what the investigation has found. However, there is no evidence that any staff knew about the abuse at the time." Not true. Quote, "We are sorry that the standards of social work practice at the time have led to some people feeling they were let down by the care system at Duncroft." At the time in the 1970s, all these attacks were somewhat of an open secret, but for many, they were more rumor than absolute fact. So Jimmy's career just went on as usual, hosting radio and TV shows for children, and he also continued his charity work, especially at hospitals where he continued to sexually abuse children. Some of his charity work had seemed genuine at the time. He raised money for things like the spinal unit at Stoke Mandeville Hospital. This seemed authentic since, if you remember, he had suffered a severe spinal injury when he was young, but like always, this was just a cover. Jimmy was given extensive access to Stoke Mandeville facilities. Even staff at the time complained about his level of access. He would also openly break rules and enter areas that were off limits to him. In 1977, an anonymous 12-year-old was admitted to the hospital to have her tonsils removed. This girl was placed in the geriatric wing of the hospital during her visit. So, in her own words, I'll be reading her story. First person, quote, "I remember being bored and asking one of the nurses if I could go to the day room to watch television. I imagine she was glad to agree because I had made a nuisance of myself in the ward. The nurse directed me to a day room, which was a short walk down the corridor. I was wearing a flimsy homemade nightdress that came down to my knees with a dressing gown over the top. I was of very slight build and my hair was in 2 pigtails. As I went through the ward door on my way to the day room, I saw a skinny man wearing a long coat. He was also wearing brown track-style suit trousers. By this, I mean the trousers he was wearing had no buttons or a zip. He had white to blonde shoulder-length hair, and he was wearing heavy rings and a gold chain around his neck. He was smoking a cigar. I didn't recognize the man at the time. The man asked me, 'Where are you going?' I recall that it was difficult for me to talk because my throat was sore. I said in a very croaky voice, 'To the television room.' The man said, 'I'll show you,' and he walked me down the corridor. I can't recall what the man said, but he was friendly and I felt comfortable in his company. I recall that as we walked along the corridor, the man opened a door which led to a room that contained a mop and bucket. Looking back, I realized that it must have been a cleaning cupboard. The man gave a short laugh and closed the door without going in. Almost immediately afterwards, we arrived in the day room. As we arrived in the day room, an elderly man was leaving, and I saw that he nodded in acknowledgement to the man who was accompanying me. The day room was a small room with a black and white television which stood on a low wooden table. There are a number of identical chairs in the room and an armchair. I went and sat on one of the chairs. The man said to me, quote, 'Have you got a boyfriend?' I didn't answer because although I had boys who are friends, I didn't understand the concept of a boyfriend. The man then bent down in front of me and positioned his body so that he was between my legs. I remember that he had a distinctive muggy odor. The man was gentle, almost caring. As he pushed my legs apart, I saw that he had opened his trousers not all the way, but sufficiently to expose his penis. I recall that his penis had a distasteful smell. Jimmy then raped that 12-year-old girl, and when it was over, he left the room without saying anything. The girl was in shock and unable to put into context what had happened. She felt disoriented before returning to the ward where her hospital bed was. She later found a nurse and reported that, quote, the porter had hurt her, pointing to her genitals. Now remember, she doesn't know who this is at the time. Obviously, this is Jimmy. She didn't know who he was, so she just knew him as the porter. The nurse then told the 12-year-old girl not to say anything because it would get her, the nurse, in trouble.
What?
Yeah.
The fuck?
Right? How? I'm not sure.
That's your job.
Right?
Protect your patients.
Is it like, oh, I was supposed to be keeping an eye on Jimmy or something? Like where he was going? I have no
or
idea.
It's like kind of blowing the whistle of like, oh shit, Jimmy did something bad. I should have been watching him.
Yeah.
Yeah,
isn't that gross?
There's something that we still don't know about all of this shit. This is so deeply corrupt and intertwined. I don't even understand.
Right, because like, why would she think that she would get in trouble?
Yeah. You're
like
a fucking nurse.
She's not like, oh, Jimmy will get in trouble. She's like, if I say that, I will get in trouble.
Right.
So can we read into this? And, I'm just theorizing here. Is it a higher up that's telling them like, hush, hush on Jimmy?
Jimmy's rolling around fucking raping girls.
Right.
If someone comes up to you and says that,
don't report it. Yeah, I don't know.
It's hard not to think that.
Right. That's the first place my mind goes to. I don't have any evidence to say that's what was going on, but
I know a ton of people also think this because we're all just, it doesn't make sense.
It doesn't. Yeah.
Like in any way, shape or form, this poor girl just goes through this horrific incident and is looking to a nurse for help. And the nurse is like,
nope.
Sorry.
Yeah, tough. And it gets
Don't say anything because I'm going to get in trouble.
Yeah. And it gets even worse because that girl returned to her bed. She later tore out 2 pages of her Bible and wrote a message to 2 of the nurses claiming that the porter had hurt her and to please call her dad. She also wrote down her address and phone number. She put the message in a hospital letterbox in the hallway near the ward. So who saw that? Who saw this? Jimmy later returned to the hospital that same night, and the girl was half asleep. He was wearing the exact same clothing as earlier. He then walked over to her bed. Out of fear, she put the covers over her head, and he molested her over the covers. It only lasted about 10 or 20 seconds. Then he left her bed, and the girl watched him walk over to one of the beds of one of the elderly women there. He then jumped on top of the woman and laid face down on top of her. One of the nurses then shouted, "You shouldn't be in there, Jimmy." And Jimmy then left the ward and nothing else was done.
The fuck? What?
Right?
No one was like, okay, Jimmy's sexually assaulting people in here. Somebody call police.
Yeah, it's just like, oh no, that's off limits. Jimmy, you got to get out of there. It's not, I don't know. It's so disturbing.
Why is there so much? Why does he feel so protected? Invincible, really.
He's very confident.
He's basically invincible through most of his life. Shielded from all, even when people firsthand eyewitness.
Right.
Him assaulting people.
Right. And
molesting, raping.
And if you were reading through the lines in that segment that I read earlier, the man who left the TV room nods at Jimmy.
Yeah.
Like, I know what's going on and I'll leave.
The fact that this creepy motherfucker even had access to these medical facilities.
Yeah.
Unfettered access.
Yeah.
Is beyond me, which tells me there's some corruption going on there. Has to be. For him to be there in the first place, some rules are being bent.
Yep.
Somebody's letting something slide. And then on top of that, the staff is acting this way when he's just, this creep is crawling around their facilities, molesting people. It's so shocking. It's hard to believe.
Yeah. And it's even more strange because really the obvious red flag is like, okay, if you want to be a donor to this hospital, great. If you want to show up for like a photo op or something and say hi to children,
a tour,
fine.
Yeah.
Fine. Why is this guy just hanging around this hospital, getting in and out? Because we know that he left and then he came back and he just has security clearance across the whole damn hospital.
Unheard of. I've never heard of this ever.
No, not once. And by the next morning, that lady who had been in the other bed was gone all of a sudden. And the girl then wrote another message on a page torn from her Bible. And it was the same message as the day before, and she put it in the same letterbox. Nothing was ever done. Who saw those and then
which
did
tells
nothing?
me that they knew this was going on and they decided to cover it up.
Yeah.
Because either likely they were told to do so. I just can't understand why any individual person would fear him so much.
Right.
The whole time I'm hearing this, I'm like, somebody needs to just beat the fuck out of Jimmy. Like,
Right,
can somebody
yeah.
fucking take out Jimmy now?
Yeah.
And it
I'm
just
surprised.
continues.
I'm
How
surprised
did
that
he-
never even happened, really.
Yeah.
Right?
Like,
Yeah, I don't get it.
it's so mind-boggling that my brain doesn't even know how to process this. Like, not once did one man fucking decide to step the fuck up and take care of this asshole. Like,
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know how
and he's
something
just
like this
this
happened.
creepy golem-like fucking figure creeping around the fucking hospitals, jumping on old ladies, raping 12. It's just,
Yeah,
it's the stuff of nightmares.
it really is. 2 years later, that young girl saw Jimmy, her attacker, on TV. Realizing, oh, this is the guy. She connected the dots. She remained confused and shocked at the whole situation. And this is one of the countless stories of abuse at the hands of Jimmy Savile. And we may never know the full extent of his horrific crimes at places like Stoke Mandeville Hospital. Many nurses later came forward saying they didn't like Jimmy because he was touching the little girls who were often patients. Not necessarily in an obvious sexual manner, but in a way that clearly made them uncomfortable. These nurses came forward, so there is somebody in this hospital is realizing that this is wrong and is trying to do something about it. And here's where it gets worse. These nurses came forward to John Lindsay, a detective constable with Thames Valley Police during the late 1970s. When he reported this twice to his colleagues, a senior colleague told him not to worry and that Jimmy Savile, quote, must be okay. John later said, quote, I wasn't satisfied, but there was nothing I could do about it. Many other countless allegations were often ridiculed and ignored by police.
This is so corrupt. It's,
Yeah, it's a broken
who
system.
knows how far
Yeah.
this went.
One sexual abuse victim at Leeds Children's Hospital in the late 1970s even injured herself intentionally before having to visit the hospital again for a third appointment, just so she wouldn't have to encounter Jimmy again. He had convinced her family and staff that he would drive the young 10-year-old girl to her appointments. After the first time, he took her to a private room where he kissed her when her parents were not present. There were countless others with similar experiences, and he often found ways to, quote, schedule his victims with similar routines. According to former hospital employees, Jimmy even admitted he engaged, here's where it gets just off the rails, in necrophiliac acts with corpses in the Leeds General Infirmary mortuary. Jimmy was allegedly friends with the chief mortician who gave him near unrestricted access to the mortuary.
Why?
Why?
The fuck?
Why does this guy need to be in here at all?
I want to know what that conversation was.
Yeah. There
Could
should
I
be-
get access to the mortuary? Why?
Why? Just cuz?
Just
Why not?
I just am like,
There should be.
where is people's common sense here?
Yeah, it makes no sense.
Well, you're a celebrity, Jimmy, so sure, why not have access to these poor deceased individuals?
There should only be two types of people in a mortuary: the mortician and the dead people. That is it.
Yeah.
There is literally no reason for anybody to be in there. So, a later investigation into this deemed Jimmy's actions were, quote, not within acceptable boundaries.
You think?
Jimmy once said, quote, I find I've got a great aptitude for dead people. Indeed, the dead rarely object to how they're treated. It was reported he stole glass eyes from the dead to make jewelry. He performed oral sex on them. He would also push male and female corpses together in sexual positions and take photographs. Sometimes he would even join them and photograph himself in lewd positions. Over at other hospitals like Broadmoor, Jimmy had an association from 1968 for 3 decades and a managerial role beginning in 1988. There were allegations made by 11 people, 6 of them patients, 2 staff, and 3 minors. A later investigation concluded that at least 5 were sexually assaulted, but again, at the time these were happening, nothing was done.
It's unbelievable.
It really is. It really is.
But this happened. And what's also crazy too, I was just going down the rabbit hole and came across during this time period in like the 70s, 80s, they were dealing with a serial killer that they dubbed the Yorkshire Ripper. And 2 of the victims' bodies were found near Jimmy Savile's home in Leeds. Like there's I looked at a map and it was like an aerial photograph. He's got his flat over here, and then there's some woods kind of off behind it, and 2 victims' bodies. These were 13 women that were murdered, brutally murdered. And the killer turned out to be Mr. Peter Sutcliffe, I believe is how you pronounce it. Now, Peter befriended Mr. Savile, and they interacted because at Broadmoor, that's where he met him. Because Broadmoor is where they had all, bunch of, people who were inmates there or patients there. And that's how the 2 got acquainted. And Mr. Savile actually called Peter mate. And this is a serial killer who's, not that much different from Mr. Jimmy.
I wouldn't put him,
so it's like, it makes you wonder though. I think a lot of people speculate, is it possible that Jimmy is involved potentially with the serial killer? Is he involved in other things outside that we don't even know about that they've never been able to connect him to?
I wouldn't put it past him.
He knew all of these other predators and killers, and it's wild. I mean, the guy's got an aptitude for dead bodies. So it makes you wonder. Just want to bring that up because I thought that was just like too hard to ignore. I was like, what?
Yeah.
And the location of the victim's body, I'm just like, this is too weird. But through the decades up until his death, Jimmy continuously denied all the allegations against him. In a 1990 interview for The Independent on Sunday, Lynn Barber asked Jimmy about rumors that he liked, quote, little girls. And Jimmy's reply was that as he worked in the pop music business, quote, the young girls in question don't gather around me because of me. It's because I know the people they love, the stars. I am of no interest to them. In April 2000, in a documentary called When Lewis Met Jimmy, Savile acknowledged, quote, salacious tabloid people had raised rumors about whether he was a pedophile. And when questioned, he said, I know I'm not. Just lies, lies, lies. Sir Roger Jones, a former BBC governor for Wales and a chairman of the BBC charity Children in Need, later disclosed that around the year 2000, he had banned the, quote, very strange and creepy Jimmy Savile from involvement in the charity. Although Jimmy defended himself through the years, toward the end of his life, he was quoted saying disturbing things. In a 2009 interview, Jimmy defended viewers of child sex abuse material. He argued that viewers, quote, didn't do anything wrong, but they are then demonized. Like, my God, the amount of fucking alarm bells that should have been going off for years.
Mm-hmm.
And this is before his death. He's saying shit like this.
Mm-hmm.
He also defended the pop star and convicted sex offender Gary Glitter. Gary Glitter had become a popular guest on Jimmy's television show and was later convicted of downloading child sex abuse material in 1999 and for sexually abusing minors under the age of 12 in 2006, along with a series of sexual offenses including rape in 2015. Jimmy described Glitter as a celebrity being unfairly treated for watching, quote, dodgy films in the privacy of his home.
Gross.
Says everything you need to know about him.
Yeah.
He added, quote, Gary has not tried to sell them, not tried to show them in public or anything like that. It were for his own gratification. Whether it was right or wrong is, of course, it's up to him as a person.
Nope, that's
no
not
morals,
how that works.
Yeah, no morals, no ethics, just a monster. It's important to note that this interview was not published at the time and the recording was not released until after Jimmy died. But Jimmy Savile died on October 29th, 2011 at the age of 84, peacefully in his sleep. And rumor is that he was found dead in his bed with his fingers crossed. Because this motherfucker thought maybe I had a chance in hell and getting into heaven.
Probably not, if I had to guess.
He said all sorts of crazy shit about, religion and like, hopefully the big man upstairs, will look at my charitable contributions and it'll, or goes easy on sinners. And he's got all sorts of quotes around, his philosophical religious views. But it's just so obvious that he's like, in his mind, he's like, well, hopefully my all the money I raised will outweigh all of the horrible, horrific crimes I committed.
It doesn't.
It's just crazy. He went his whole life without a day in jail, without any legal consequences for his actions. And in his mind, he was on his deathbed. He knew he had gotten away with all of it. He fucking outsmarted everybody. He got nothing. No consequences. And after he passed, nearly 4,000 people visited his gold-colored coffin to pay their respects because he had like a viewing, of course, in his hometown, blah, blah, blah.
Mm-hmm.
And then had his coffin toured around Scarborough, where he had a home to give people a chance to pay their respects to him before his burial. He was buried with a Royal Marines medal and a Green Beret, along with a Help for Heroes wristband. But guess what? His fucking headstone, which costs like 4,000 pounds, I think probably more than that, but his fucking headstone was removed several days later because his family was worried that his shit would be defaced, would be fucking,
they were probably right. They were right.
So they had it removed preemptively. And what makes me sick about his fucking headstone, and thank God it's not there anymore, it says, he has a quote on there that says, "It was good while it lasted." And
Son
just
of a
the
bitch.
context of that.
Yeah, through this lens.
Lens is just sickening. But he had this big fancy black like marble headstone, that gold inscription, says Sir Jimmy Savile, beloved son, loving brother, philanthropist, TV presenter, DJ, marathon runner, cyclist, wrestler, chieftain of Lockhaber, Highland Games, blah, 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 friend and supporter. And then, of course, all of his fucking, charities that he gave to and all of that. And yeah, they had to remove it several days later because there was reports that it was going to be fucking defaced.
I would have.
And destroyed.
I would do something like that.
So he's actually buried in an unmarked grave. Just a hole in the ground, hopefully somewhere in a fucking dump. Because this guy doesn't deserve anything whatsoever. Yeah. His family, they had to do this in the dead of night too, which is wild. They had to like do this like secret operation because they knew his shit was going to get fucked up if they left it there. And, he lost all of his fucking honors, thank God, when all of this started coming out. And, which rightfully say it's streets named after him. He had gotten every fucking medal and honorary degree, you name it. All the awards and accolades, Jimmy got it during his lifetime, and they all got stripped away as they should. But
except he's still technically knighted.
Is he really?
Yeah, there's a weird there's a weird rule.
Oh, you can't
it's like
unknight somebody?
You can't unknight someone, but I was reading into it. It's something like you can take it to a committee or something. I don't know, but I think he's still technically knighted.
That's wild.
Yeah.
Austin, one of the cabinet office spokesmen said that it's a living order, and then you cease to be a member when you die, and there isn't an honor to revoke because he's dead. Once you're dead, you're no longer a knight, according to this person. That's the technicality.
Yet they can throw it on his headstone that he's still a sir, right?
Forever.
Yeah, that's a... Yeah,
well, the
that is a
headstone's
bullshit
in the dump
technicality.
now, dude.
That's
They
where it should
fucking
be.
took his headstone, grinded all the inscriptions off, and threw his shit in a dump. And then they threw his ass into an unmarked grave somewhere.
It's hilarious that they were like, oh no, someone's going to deface this headstone. And then they take it and deface the headstone and throw it away. It's
Honestly,
like,
good
what?
for the family for doing that.
I mean, it would have ended up the same way regardless of what
someone
they
would
did.
have blown it up
Yeah.
and defaced it. So we're going to play you a short clip of two victims named Katrina Rose and Karen Ward, who gave a BBC interview on some of their experiences.
And we heard from Karen Ward just a bit earlier as well. So you'll hear a familiar voice.
I just didn't know what to do. Did not know what was happening. I was quite a naive 14-year-old. The worst thing that I will never get out of my head is the taste of his cigar breath.
I can't believe that I allowed such things to happen, that I didn't immediately rush and scream it from the rooftops. Make this stop. Just make it stop.
Here's a clip of Dee Coles, who's one of the victims who came forward in 2012 and had been assaulted in Jimmy's caravan in 1972. She was invited to his van when she was a teenager.
The first word that comes to my head is that he was really strong. I think to sexually abuse two 14-year-olds, even though the door was locked, I think that's the shock of it, really, that we just couldn't get out. I suppose the compassionate side of me wants to say he was a man that obviously needed some help. The gut reaction is just to say there was something quite evil about him.
That's also wild that the victim is even giving him some benefit of he just needed some help. But then she does clarify that's your gut response is also this guy's just evil.
Yeah, to elaborate on her story a little bit, it's pretty graphic, but Jimmy, once she was locked inside his caravan, Jimmy had forced Dee's hands down the front of his pants, and she said this was her first introduction to the male body. It's just horrifying. He then forced her to perform sex acts on him, and after it was over, he tried to get her to return to the caravan a second time. She later said, quote, "He didn't seem like a stranger. He was on our telly every Saturday night. It was exciting with someone on TV. How it made me feel at the time. Immense panic as soon as the door locked. Afterwards, it was shame." Dee was one out of an overwhelming amount of victims with similar stories who came forward in 2012. While many were relieved that the truth was finally revealed, others were angry at victims like Dee for tarnishing the legacy of Jimmy Savile, who many still saw as a philanthropic hero. They saw Jimmy as a man who had spent his whole life helping others, and others critiqued the legitimacy of many of the victims' statements, saying if it was all true, why wouldn't they have come forward earlier? And these are always the fucking things that are said.
It's always the troglodytes that come out of the woodwork and say stupid shit like this.
Yep. These voices also victim blamed and claimed that these young women and girls had thrown themselves at DJs and pop stars for years. But as the massive waves of victim statements alleging sexual abuse came pouring in, there was less and less doubt that Jimmy Savile was one of the worst sexual predators in show business history. It's believed that Jimmy's earliest known allegations date back to the mid-1940s. It's hard to wrap your head around.
Yeah.
And this is according to one inquiry report. On November 12, 2012, the Metropolitan Police announced the scale of sexual allegations reported against Jimmy Savile was, quote, unprecedented in Britain. A total of 450 alleged victims had contacted the police in the 10 weeks since the investigation was launched. Officers recorded 199 crimes in 17 police force areas in which Jimmy was a suspect. Among them, 31 allegations of rape in 7 police force areas. Analysis of the report showed 82% of those who came forward to report abuse were female, and 80% were children or young people at the time of the incidents. His victims range from 5 years old to 75 years old. So everybody was a potential victim to Jimmy Savile. Victims included children as young as 5, paralyzed or disabled teenagers in wheelchairs, and pregnant women. He is alleged to have abused people over a 60-year period. So basically the entire time this guy was alive, he was abusing people. A joint report by 2 law enforcement agencies submitted in January 2013 concluded that the height of Jimmy's offenses had reached its peak in 1974 and 1975. There were 30 sexual assaults reported between these 2 years alone, and as the scandal continued to unfold, Operation U-Tree identified 300 victims and 400 lines of inquiry. The true extent of his crimes, I think we all can agree, will never truly be known.
Yeah.
There's estimates that the victims are in the 1,000+ range.
Yeah.
And to make it even worse, and what makes this just so absolutely probably one of the worst cases ever, I think, is that he was never arrested, never charged with a crime, never held accountable. No justice will ever be served in this case.
Yep.
Because of just systematic
cover up. What else can
corruption
you
cover
yeah,
up?
What else can you even call it? 30 sexual assaults reported between 1974 and 75. 2 years.
Yes.
30. What?
Reported.
Reported. Yeah. So imagine the ones that went unreported.
He could have been sexually assaulting someone every day over those 60-year period.
Seriously.
For all we know.
Yeah.
Who even knows what was really going on? Who even knows what he was doing?
Yeah.
The guy was
no idea.
Alone a lot, traveling around all the time.
Mm-hmm.
He didn't sit still. He was all over the place. Who knows?
Yeah.
And who knows who he was in fucking cahoots with?
No.
Was he involved with other serial rapists and serial killers? Could he have been connected or funded? Who fucking knows? I think it's, getting a little conspiratorial, but it's like, how can you not?
Naturally, I think,
yeah,
that's where anybody's mind goes, is like, this could go on so deep. The spider web could be so large and vast. I think it's natural to let your mind wander into that. But maybe this is a silver lining, but looking back, while many seem to ignore or claim ignorance to Jimmy's behavior through the years, some were brave enough to point it out. Back in an October 1978 interview on BBC Radio 1, Sex Pistols former vocalist John Lydon, aka Johnny Rotten, alluded to Jimmy's behavior at the time. He said, quote, "I'd like to kill Jimmy Savile. I think he's a hypocrite. I bet he's into all kinds of seediness that we all know about but are not allowed to talk about. I know some rumors." He also said, quote, "I bet none of this will be allowed out." And sure enough, this comment was edited by the BBC before the interview was broadcast. Johnny Rotten later expanded on his original quote, saying, quote, "By killed, I meant locking him up and stopping him assaulting young children. I'm disgusted at the media pretending they weren't aware." So after the allegations had reached the international media spotlight in 2012, many wondered who turned a blind eye to Jimmy's rampant sexual abuse. The unfortunate answer: it's not one, it's not two, it's many, many people. In October 2012, in the fallout of a massive wave of allegations, Dame, or that's kind of like what we call a judge here, Janet Smith, began an independent inquiry into the BBC. The review, which cost £6.5 million and is 1,000 pages and 3 volumes long, heard evidence from more than 700 people, including 117 witnesses from the BBC. Dame Janet said there had been a, quote, "culture of separation, competition, and even hostility between different parts of the BBC, so that concerns arising in one part would not be discussed with others. Staff were reluctant to speak out to their managers because they felt it was not their place to do so. She also said celebrities had been, quote, treated with kid gloves and were virtually untouchable. God.
And I think, this is obviously how it was and how it was, we have these same types of predators here in, the U.S., Harvey Weinstein,
Brian Peck,
this whole reason the Me Too movement happened, right?
Bryan Singer. Yeah.
Bryan Singer is that this culture of if you're a celebrity, you somehow have immunity to, being prosecuted or reported for committing these crimes is just crazy. And it's like, why did that start in the first place? Who created this culture? Because it clearly spans across different countries even. Is it just this culture of fame, like the concept of fame? Like, where did that, I don't know, that I'm like, where did this start?
Yeah.
And because it's BBC, it's, different production companies in Hollywood. It's all over the place. It's within government. It's within the royal family. It's like, is it just it's just an ancient evil that has perpetrated throughout all of time and has manifested in these ways that we've seen.
Yeah.
I don't know. I don't know. I try to understand, but it just doesn't make sense. Like, why? Just evil people.
Yeah, I don't know if we'll ever be able to answer the why question, but yeah, it is. It's like Hollywood. You could see it. We don't have our own royalty in the U.S., so we kind of see celebrities as this. There's like a social hierarchy, and they're at the top, which is gross.
Because of their fame, fortune, they're able to not play by the same rules the rest of us are.
Yep. Yeah.
Sick.
Yep.
It's demented.
But good on Dame Janet for really.
Yeah, shame on the fucking BBC, man.
I know. And good on Dame Janet for igniting this inquiry into the BBC, because it must be a beast to tackle. BBC is not only one of the largest publications in Britain, one of the largest publications in the world, especially at least the Western world, right? But much of the report specifically focused on Jimmy Savile and another man, Stuart Hall, who is another media personality who worked for BBC in the 60s and 70s on the game show It's a Knockout. Stewart assaulted 21 females, the youngest aged 10, between 1967 and 1991. Stuart Hall was later convicted of multiple sexual offenses, including offenses against children. On April 16, 2013, Hall pleaded guilty to 14 charges of indecent assault involving 13 girls aged between 9 and 17 years old. 14 charges. He was sentenced to 2.5 years and was released after only serving half his sentence in December 2015. The report found that 2 senior managers at BBC had been, quote, aware or, quote, probably aware of Hall's sexual assaults on BBC premises. I believe Hall has since passed.
The fuck?
Yeah.
It's so clear that the punishments for these offenders is just not severe enough.
Just slap on the wrist.
14, 13, whatever. Like 2 years and you're out. And like the data shows that these offenders continue to reoffend.
Of course. Of course.
I see why people are like, the only good pedophile is a dead one. I see why people have that perspective, because it's just like,
I mean,
what else do you do?
Yeah.
They don't put these people away. They don't punish them correctly.
Yeah. I mean, Johnny Rotten said, I'd like to kill Jimmy Savile.
Yeah.
Oh, and he meant it.
Yeah, I know. Yeah. I think he tried to retcon it later on to be like, oh, I don't really
But
mean
no,
it.
he meant it.
Yeah. I mean, I understand why people hold that sentiment, because it's truly disgusting. And, ideally we'd love to live in under a government or under rule that would hold these people accountable, and seeing that we don't.
Well, in other countries they do.
It's
other countries,
brutal.
you're dead man.
Right. Yeah.
Or you're getting, your balls cut off, you're getting castrated.
Yeah.
In other countries, they still handle these things differently. And for some reason in the Western world, and I think it has a lot to do with the fact that oftentimes these offenders are within the upper echelons of society, that the punishments are lessened.
Absolutely.
But again,
and when you live within a system that you see that nothing really happens, you want to move to the most drastic part, right? As a form of, even if it's just rebellion, you're just let's off them, because clearly the system is so busted.
Yeah, it's all messed up.
Yeah, this whole thing is just infuriating. As for the BBC's inquiry into Jimmy, it was revealed that in regard to his work at BBC, he sexually assaulted 72 people. The youngest victim was 8. Most took place in the 70s and involved the show Top of the Pops. 8 people were raped, and there was 1 instance of an attempted rape. 3 incidents of rape and attempted rape took place on BBC premises. 8 informal complaints had been made. An independent inquiry found that the number of victims could have been as high as 177, but some have reported that Jimmy abused up to 1,000 victims while working for BBC. 2 BBC managers had confronted Jimmy over claims he took teenagers home from Top of the Pops. Jimmy admitted to this, but said he was simply giving the girls a bed for the night because they had nowhere to stay. No, red flag. The Dame Janet Smith review reported that BBC culture, quote, was deeply deferential, and staff were reluctant to speak to managers about complaints. Director General Lord Hall said the BBC had failed to protect the victims. The review found that senior managers were not told of complaints about Savile because of a, quote, atmosphere of fear, which still exists in the BBC. However, a small number of BBC managers in Manchester were aware of Stuart Hall's conduct. The report also found that Jimmy would commit sexual assaults, quote, whenever the opportunity arose, and incidents took place, quote, in virtually every one of the BBC premises at which he worked. The report highlighted a number of people who either knew about Jimmy Savile and Stuart Hall's abuse, suspected it, or should have known but failed to take action. So we're going to put these people on blast. The people mentioned were Ted Beston, Jimmy's Radio 1 producer, acted as a, quote, provider of young women for Jimmy at least once. The next, Canon Colin Semper, who worked with Jimmy as a producer and on his book, God'll Fix It, was praised as, quote, a completely honest man. And next was Douglas Muggeridge, late controller of Radio 1 and 2 in 1973, launched 2 investigations into Savile in 1973, but the inquiries were more concerned with, quote, risk of damage to the BBC's reputation than the welfare of the girls who might be involved. Another one on this list was Raymond Colley, regional television manager at BBC Manchester from 1978 to 1986. He spoke to Stuart Hall about his conduct, but failed to check up on the star's behavior. I mean, whatever. Tom German, late BBC Manchester editor in the 1970s, was, quote, probably aware Stuart Hall was having sex on BBC premises and should have shared concerns with Raymond Colley, but had not known any underage girls were involved. So some are maybe worse than others, but those were the ones that were noted in that report.
So a massive government inquiry, which I think is just their word for investigation.
Yeah.
Over there. But they did one after Jimmy died, and this inquiry ended up costing £200 million, which consisted of 7 years of hearings that included tens of thousands of speakers who were survivors of sexual abuse, and the recommendations were expected to pave the way for sufferers to make claims with the government to receive compensation. Personal injury claims must normally be brought within 3 years, but the law ruled in 2008 that this time limit could be extended in cases of sexual assault, meaning that many of Jimmy's victims could potentially receive compensation, as they should. The Criminal Injury Compensation Authority, also known as CICA, attempted to help those who had been affected by the abuse from Jimmy Savile. Compensation could also be payable by the BBC or the Department of Health if the assaults occurred on their premises. 8 categories of assault were identified, ranging from touching over clothing to rape, with fixed up to a maximum of £60,000. The National Health Service of the UK was left with a £1.1 million bill for compensating victims of Jimmy Savile after the late sexual predator's estate contributed only £53,000. It was like,
I don't know how they
only got £53,000 from this guy.
Mhm.
He had to have much, much, much more.
Yeah.
Reportedly, the estate did not fully refund the NHS. It's unclear if the full amount was ever settled. Sexual abuse survivors groups called the reimbursement from Savile's estate, quote, pretty appalling.
Yeah.
And described the payouts as utterly derisory and just flat out peanuts. £53,000. Many of the victims needed significant amounts of money to pay for the private therapy that the NHS was often unable to provide, and some will require specialist care for the rest of their lives. It's just so sad. Peter Saunders, the founder of the National Association for People Abused in Childhood, said, quote, the real winners in these situations tend to be the lawyers, I'm afraid. About £600,000 of the £1.1 million from the NHS went to legal fees.
Ugh.
With the remaining £500,000 were paid in damages to the 52 victims, which equals to about £10,000 each. As of 2019, there are still a handful of open cases. These lawyers couldn't do this pro bono.
Right.
Like, really? They scooped up
that's
almost 3/4 of the fund.
Ugh.
Over the years, many have complained that the compensation just wasn't enough. Rightfully so. Leisha Brooks, one of the victims we mentioned earlier, who was repeatedly abused by Jimmy at the BBC. And I don't blame her.
Mm-hmm.
Although she initially reported the abuse back in the 1980s, the police did not take her claim seriously at the time. She was compensated £18,750 by the BBC years ago, but used it to pay off her debts. She expected her compensation to be boosted through the SICA, and she'd been told she would get an additional £22,000, but only received £3,250 in compensation after waiting 5 years for the payout. Leisha said, quote, it's disgusting, to be honest, a joke. She was a victim we mentioned earlier who had been abused by up to 30 men at the BBC television center when she was between 8 and 11 years old. She went on to suffer mental health problems throughout her life and attempted suicide more than 20 times. Her life had become destabilized over the years, causing all of her relationships to break down and lose custody of her children. She used the BBC award to pay off debts and now lives on £155 a week in disability benefits in a small council house. Leisha added, quote, I can't be touched by men. I can't go in crowded places near men. If a man phones me up, I'll put the phone down. If there are men either side of me in a supermarket queue, I have to put my shopping down and leave. My life has been destroyed by everything that happened to me as a child. I am severely psychologically damaged now. My story has been proven, and yet here I am still fighting. Leisha is not alone in her struggle for compensation and dealing with the aftermath of sexual abuse. The victims, especially in the case of Jimmy Savile, were abused within a system that protected sexual predators rather than innocent children. Whether that system is still in place remains to be seen. And I'm curious to hear, for those of you that live in the UK, if there's any updates that you're aware of around Jimmy Savile's case, or just anybody has any personal experiences around this whole ordeal they'd be willing to share publicly. I'm really curious to see what the comments look like for this one, because I'm sure there's going to be a lot of both interesting and also disturbing things shared. But even today, over a decade after his death, many are still experiencing the pain that Jimmy Savile caused. His true number of victims, somewhere in the hundreds, again possibly thousands, might never be fully understood. And the sheer number of people who were complicit or turned a blind eye in his actions also remains a mystery. And it's crazy to me that none of these other people named were ever disciplined, jailed. You know, somebody should be held accountable for his, some of the liability. Somebody was culpable in this.
Yeah. It's crazy because just like, I don't know, it's like being aware of a crime is a crime, right?
Right. It's unreal. But yeah, Jimmy Savile's legacy will forever remain a permanent stain on British history, as it should. And God, I'm sure you could go even deeper on this one. This is just one that never ends.
Mm-hmm.
just from the sheer amount of victims and people connected to him,
Yeah.
And it's like, how come we never, sure, there's more when it comes to the people in high places as well that have kept their mouth shut, hoping that this all just goes away and is lost to time. But yeah, I think it's important to, I certainly didn't know about it. And, I think it's important that people know about this too, because these types of people still exist today. We're still finding people. And luckily people are gaining the courage to come out and speak out and report these people to the authorities, and they're no longer in positions where they can do this for 60 years like Jimmy Savile, right? But it's good to be aware that there's still these predators out there. It's scary, honestly.
Yeah.
And show business is a place where even to this day, I feel like these people sometimes find a place to thrive. And, in Jimmy's case, a lot of these people just never expected that this would happen, that this was the person they're seeing on television is far different from the real person. And I think in today's day and age, depending on who it is, sometimes you get a little bit more inside look into celebrities, although a lot of them are still pretty private, even on social media. It's like, we often wonder, is the person in the film the real person? Is the person in the interviews and the award shows, is that the real,
right,
individual, or is there another side to them that we don't know?
Yeah.
Good or bad.
Right.
But I think the same could be said for anyone. Schools, churches, you name it. There's people like this that lurk, but
yeah, any power structures, right?
Yep.
Yeah, this one was exhausting.
Yeah, I'm exhausted just covering it. And I'm pissed off.
I know that got me fired up.
I'm just like, fuck these people, dude.
Yeah.
Fuck Jimmy Savile. I hope if there is a fucking hell, he's in it.
Yeah, same.
Yeah.
Same.
That's where he deserves to be.
Yeah.
Because the fact that he lived out his entire life with no accountability for this, I hope in the afterlife there is some fucking accountability for him. Or if there's if reincarnation's real, I hope he comes back a fucking cockroach and somebody fucking smashes his ass.
Yeah.
And then he comes back as something even worse.
Yeah, what's worse than a cockroach?
I think that's an insult to cockroaches.
Yeah, right, exactly.
What's even worse?
A mosquito.
That's pretty bad.
Look, all I have to say is that if you see something, say something.
Yes.
Yeah, honestly.
Yeah. Yeah. That's the takeaway, I guess, at the end of the day. And I truly hope that his victims are doing as well as they possibly can and are getting the help that they need to deal with this horrible situation that they went through. And I hope that the government gets their shit together and can help these people out and give them the funds. Make sure the BBC and everybody else involved that's has some liability in this ultimately gets them the funds to help them pay for the rehabilitation and care that they need. But yeah, we're gonna go ahead and wrap up today's episode there because it's been a long one. And but yeah, really curious to hear your thoughts on this one. And who should we cover next? I'm sure there's others out there that we should dive into, but we'll see you guys next time. Until then, lights out, everybody.